I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum, and we're interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the UK. It's July 9th, 2024, and we are online. And I'm here today talking to Janet Richards. Janet, let's just, if you provide some background first of all, please just tell me your full name and your place and your year of birth.
Okay, yeah. So it's Janet Richards. I was Janet Gray then, born in 1960. I'm currently in Hooking, Hampshire at the moment.
And what about your kind of background of growing up? Where were you born and what was the kind of family, parents, family life like?
Well, I was born in London, and spent the first sort of 16 years in London with my mum and dad and older brother, and sort of gradually moved out of sort of northwest London. And in fact, when I was employed by Digital, I was in Pinner in Middlesex, which I doesn't exist anymore, but that was my calling ground.
And what was school like? Where did you go and what kind of subjects did you pursue or were you interested in?
Well, actually, I sort of got I went out of catchment and I went to a girls' grammar school at Burlington, which was in Wood Lane, near Wormer Scrubs prison, actually. And I was just, I don't know, very, I suppose, did the 11 plus and got in. And I had a grant from our local council then. But it was a great school. It was single sex girls school until we got into the sixth form, and then it sort of we joined with the local boys' school, which was St Clement Danes, and I was then head girl, and my boyfriend was the head boy of Clement Danes.
And what subjects did you like or were you interested in?
Well, I think that was sort of my love. I think it was a particular teacher. I mean, I did Latin, which I hated, but it's one of those things that we had to get through. Um, I did, but my favourite subject really was geography, and in fact, I went on to do a degree in physical geography and agriculture. Sort of as a result of that, as Miss Davis, the teacher there, sort of really quite. I don't know, memorable, but very, it was obviously something that sort of struck a chord with me in terms of the way she presented, geography. Don't particularly like human geography. I'm more physical geography in terms of, rivers, glaciers, and all of that good stuff.
And so which university did you go to?
I went to actually Reading,
Any reason you went to Reading? Was it
just up
the
the road.
course or any other factors?
It was the course. Yeah, it was the course. So there was only Reading and I think it was Durham that actually did a physical geography course, which is what I wanted to do. And in fact, Reading, I know that um, in the middle, the sort of the second year summer, and they had field trips that supported you doing your dissertation, and you either went to the Sahara or the Arctic. And I'd sort of generated this love of glaciers, and so for me, going up to the Arctic to Norway was absolutely what I wanted to do. So Reading was my you know was the one for me.
And so what year are we talking here, roughly, or era?
We're talking 78, 78 to 81. I was at
And
uni.
what's Reading like at this time
So,
then?
and then I joined the university
Or the
itself.
area, Reading, the university and the town itself. What are your memories of Reading at that time?
I mean, I had some, to be honest, some pretty awful digs because I moved out of, I was in halls for the first sort of 6 months of the first year and decided it really wasn't for me. But then moving into sort of private accommodation, it really was pretty gross actually for the first year and the second year. I was on Oxford Road, way out, and I actually sort of cycled in and out every day up Silver Street. And the second year was actually a bit closer because that was Basingstoke Road. But and then in the third year, I moved back into halls just because I thought, have a bit more comfort, or at least actually have a bit of warmth and hot running water, as opposed to what we've been used to in private digs.
And that's classic.
And I mean, in terms of the, yeah,
Go on, I didn't mean to cut you off. Carry on.
in terms of the town, I mean, it's, I think we sort of, I remember the pie shop greatly. I think they used to do cheap pies for students then, most of sort of the activity. I used to live in Cemetery Junction as well, so there's a. I mean, I think it was probably a bit of a more upmarket place than maybe it is today.
That's a good point. I mean, what do you remember of it? I mean, we see Reading today. Was it a busy high street? Was it more of a kind of a kind of small middle provincial town kind of feel? What was the kind of vibe in Reading at this time?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was. I think it was more. I think Broads. Which one was it? One of the streets was pedestrianised, but I think all of them are now pedestrianised. And I don't know. It just had a bit more of a. There was more of a centre, a bit more spirit to it. Whereas now it seems to me a bit of a sad old place that really needs some, I don't know, investment injected into it and some life and some, things other than nail bars and charity shops, really.
Where were the places you go out? I mean, the pubs you kind of remember, or bars, or places you go out in Reading at that time?
Well, I remember it sort of Cemetery Junction area. It was the Free Tums up there. I presume that's probably still there. As I say, the pie place. I don't know, that sort of stuck in my mind. That was down by the Hexagon. Yeah, I mean, just sort of various sort of really sort of very local to wherever I was actually living. And then, of course, there was always the Students' Union on campus as well.
What's student life like?
So,
Was it a kind of visible
variety.
student community, do you think? Was it active student community?
Yeah, it was pretty good. So, I mean, there were lots of sort of societies. I mean, I went, there was a parachute club and I went parachuting, and potholing, I went potholing. There was a lot of, the social clubs, and they all seemed to be very, very active.
So what happened when you graduated? Where did you go next? I'm presuming into work after that. Where did you go after that?
Yeah, well, what I did then was having had the taste of the Arctic, as it were. I wanted to go into the construction industry, and I wanted to become a permafrost engineer. But I think as a sort of a very male-dominated industry, I didn't feel I had the confidence enough to be able to do that. And so I'd always wanted to travel. I'd always wanted to go to New Zealand. So what I decided to do was to work for a year, get a job, sort of like any odd job, as it were, that would sort of fund my travelling, which I did. And I ended up actually in the printing industry, and I became a hyphenation programmer.
What is that?
So basically, yeah, well, so if you think of various languages, so let's take the German language, and you've got the Chasse S. So basically, if you hyphenate that has, it's a squiggly line, and then, but if you hyphenate it, it has to become an S-S. So I had to do research in, various languages to actually come up with rules as to how hyphenation could be done. So they were phototype setters, and that we were selling them all around the world. And my responsibility was, the hyphenation program to come up with so it's the rules and then the exceptions. So we think it's quite easy in English, but it's actually quite complicated. And then you take it to another level with all the other sort of it's only European languages that we focused on.
Okay.
And with that, I stayed with that company for about a year. And I did a lot of traveling there because I went out and I also did a lot of training. So I went to Japan, the States, quite a bit, around Europe. But in the end, it was still my desire to go to New Zealand. And I left, having, accumulated enough money. I left there, went off traveling for about 4 months, and sort of really when as I sort of, left one job, I suddenly realized, well, actually, I probably need a job to come back to. And that's when I started doing, if you like, more traditional graduate searches. So things like people like Marks and Spencer's, IBM, and digital happened to be one of them. It wasn't necessary. I was just looking for a graduate recruitment program. And, in those days, there were quite a few of them. And, it seemed like you had the choice of many. And so I applied to all of these, and I actually ended up being interviewed by Digital in Auckland because of the way, and again, it was paperwork, it wasn't sort of through email or anything like that. It's the way the paperwork had sort of caught up with me, and I was able to be in a location of Digital where I could be interviewed and go through that process, complete the interview process, and they offered me a job, and I did tell a little white lie on my application form, because it was something like, when are you available for work? And I said, something like the 1st of February. But what I'd sort of really hadn't taken into account, I would think I was flying from back via the States, and I left, the end of January, and I actually got into Heathrow on the 1st of February. My mum had to come to the airport with a pair of shoes and a suit for me to change into, so that I could get off the red eye and then get into London to start my first day at DEC, and that was down in Oxford Street.
That must have been quite a bump back into reality. What was the interview like in Auckland? How did that go? What was the position you were interviewing for?
Well, I think it was just part of the graduate program, and I think it was software services, but it was really chilled and laid back, because actually there were very few people. I think it was a Friday afternoon, and if you know anything about Kiwis, they love their sailing, and Friday afternoon, let's leave as early as possible so we can be out, in the Hauraki Gulf. And there were very few people in the office, because they'd all, gone sailing. So, to be honest, I can't remember much about what I think it was more about personality, as opposed to, the applying for a specific job. It was just the graduate program. And it happened to be that, I was going to work in London and join the software services group there.
Well, it's interesting that they so did you apply in the UK, but the interview took place in Auckland?
Yeah,
interesting that the kind of process followed you out there. They must have seen something they liked in your CV. I'd have thought.
I don't really know. I mean, I think it was just, and I was very grateful, because when you suddenly realise, I'm travelling now, but I do need a job to come back to. It was, I'm not saying that, but it wasn't specifically, I didn't really know anything about digital. I knew more about Marks and Spencer's and IBM in terms of a brand than I did about digital equipment. So it was really just fortuitous.
How did you feel about it when the news came through? Were you kind of, I suppose, uncertain or apprehensive, or what degree of curiosity did you have about digital?
Well, I think it was, let's sort of give it a go, see what it's like, because and again, I haven't really, I think also because I was traveling, I was still in that sort of, I don't know, state of euphoria in terms of, this isn't normal life, and I quite like this, not having a normal life and just traveling around. And as I went from New Zealand via the Pacific back into the States, and then came home that way. So, the whole thing about, starting a job was sort of like really pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. And, hang on, and we're landing in at Heathrow. I've got to get the Piccadilly line into, where is it I'm going? What am I doing? So, yes, it was a bit of a shock. But then actually, I sort of literally landed, got into the office. And then, the people who were there were just so so great. It didn't actually feel like working. It felt like, oh, I've made a whole, here's a whole new group of friends, and you know, and in fact, I was going to be a specialist on RSX or
Mm.
Ristus, but which again, one of the old operating systems rather than VMS. And then suddenly decided for some reason, no, I'd go on the VMS side. And so that was sort of, I was allocated a mentor, and who's still a friend today. And I think she thought, oh my God, what have I got here with this of, me falling in the door, having just come off a red eye, not knowing at one end of a computer from another. And, she was quite quite a sort of technical, serious person. And here's me sort of like, sort of bubbly and just, I don't know what a computer is. And well, I'm here for, let's get started. So.
So did you know what the job was going to be? Well, obviously it's a graduate intake program, but what kind of things were you therefore expected to do, or did you find yourself doing sort of straight out?
Well, to be honest, I didn't really have much. I didn't really have a clue what I was going to do, but it just, again, because of the team I was with, they just sort of like took me with them, and that what I was actually in, I think I was in pre-sales initially, so it was very much in terms of learning the systems and then being able to support the sales process. So yeah, and that sort of happened over a period of time because obviously there was a substantial amount of training that I had to go through in terms of understanding what on earth I was supposed to be doing and what was VMS and all of that good stuff. And and then I ended up on one of the teams we were supporting Barclays Bank. So I was part of the technical team then doing sort of installations and all sorts of stuff like that. So I do remember, you know, being around in the old sort of computer rooms with your high heels on, with your heels falling down the grid of the air conditioning units. But yeah, I sort of remember all of that. How many pairs of shoes I ruined as you went and I was doing these installations of updates across Barclays and the financial sector.
So how quickly did you progress up, I suppose, to supporting installations? Because you've gone from like a sort of sales support role to, I'm imagining what's quite a technical role.
Yeah, well, again, it was probably over a year or so. But again, I think what was also so good is that it was just such a sort of supportive team. So even if you found yourself in a situation where there was something technically you just didn't understand, couldn't do, you could just, it's almost like ringing up your mates and say, hang on a minute, can you help me here? And they'd sort you out.
So you start. So tell me. So explain to me first of all what was sales support. What did that involve? What would you be doing? So give me an example of what the role would involve, or what a day might look like.
Well, you may well go on client visits with a sales guy. So he would be doing all the selling of, or the patter about the system might look like this, and then my role would be then when if the client had any sort of technical details that they wanted to know about, like, and so it would just really be supporting him in that technical role.
And
If that
then
makes sense.
that
Yeah.
makes sense. And then so you progressed there, and you said you had a substantial amount of training as well to get you up to speed on things. Was that
Yeah.
was that at Reading, or was it in other places, and was it classroom based? How was give me a picture of how the training was
Yeah.
delivered and how it went.
Uh, well, it was all. I mean, there was the training was mostly, I'm thinking, in Reading. It depended really on sort of subjects because I did actually. There was I also moved into All in One, which was I suppose Office 365 now. But the sort of early version of it was a word processor, email, and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of the training was done in Valbonne, down in the South of France. But again, it would really depend, and there would be courses really all over Europe, and you know, depending on circumstance, because I was sort of single, actually going to Valbonne or going to Germany was actually quite for a week was quite nice as opposed to going to Reading. So the training was really quite sort of substantial, and you know, it was very much in terms of sort of self-driven. It may well be that you had, you know, there were a whole series of courses that you had to complete in order to, you know, put yourself forward from, say, an associate to a specialist. But at the same time, that if there were also areas that you sort of took your interest, you know, you could talk to him and say, I'd really like to go and understand more about networks or whatever it is, because, and, you know, depending on budget availability, etc., you know, you could go and do that as well.
So they're very open
So
to
it felt
training.
very,
It wasn't necessarily they dropped on you. You could actually go and ask for sort of training in areas
yeah,
as well.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, and I think as well, very much if you were going and even sort of staying in Reading, you would actually be put up in a hotel, and you know there would be you know, your sort of meals would be paid for. So it was very easy, and actually yeah, I mean it wasn't done, there obviously was a budget, but it wasn't a minimal budget. So
And
that made things so you know, and you could, you know, so if you had a course on Monday to Friday, if you went out on the Saturday, that, you know, that wasn't frowned upon, or, you know, you could go and do that. Obviously, you'd pay for your own accommodation. But again, you know, if the flights or something could be approved to go earlier than the course.
and so the training is it sounds very classroom based and lots of it. So there was a kind of two-way street. You could ask for it and also they would put you on it. Did you find, I suppose, during this time,
Yeah.
you're sort of being, you said you're a mentor, which I understand, but also at a bigger level, do you find management was kind of very kind of engaged in your career development, you know, kind of, and if so, kind of, how did that maybe come across?
Yeah, I think probably in the early days, I wasn't particularly worried about progression or anything. It was more about sort of getting an understanding of what I was supposed to be doing, you know, with the support of the rest of the team. And then I think it was, you know, because you could sort of go through the more of a technical career path or more of a management career path. And mine was probably more management rather than technical, because I'd never seen myself as particularly technically, you know, very technical. So it was more the management and the consulting pathway that sort of took my interest, and I think, and that was sort of recognized. It was a, you know, a discussion, and it was very much, you know, I made it clear, you know, it wasn't a technical path for me, but something else. And then I was supported in that manner.
Do you remember? I mean, I ask people often remember individuals, managers who kind of took an interest in their career or encouraged them or said, you know, you really should consider this. Any individuals kind of stand out, or any particular moments as, you know, encouraging you to go forward or move in directions?
But yeah, I mean, I did. What was interesting, I did have a number of female managers. So I remember in the early days, a lady called Val McManus. And again, she was sort of, you know, in London. And there were quite a lot of, you know, females right across the teams. So she was one. I had a manager, John Tebby, who was very sort of supportive in whatever I wanted to do. June May, again, another. And then when I sort of branched into the European teams, you know, again, there were sort of June May, Michelle Moise, and another host of sort of managers there. there was also in the early days, lovely Irish guy, Jim, can't remember. He took me over to Galway with him to see the Galway plant, and that was quite a trip with him. I think we had a lockdown in one of his local pubs because he came from Galway. That was quite memorable, but he was still, we were still in the pub at 2 a.m. And the following morning, 9 o'clock, walk into the unit there. And probably the majority of the people who were in the lockdown in the pub were still there. But my God, they were bright and breezy. And they just they just carried on. And in fact, it was Jim who he had this wonderful phrase, which was to peak strategically. So he taught me about, you may well be very, very quiet and don't say very much, but when you say something, it has impact. And everyone goes...
And that is the definition of peak strategically, is it?
Sorry?
Sorry, is that the definition of peak strategically?
Yeah, well, that was his definition. That's what he did really well. You'd be in a workshop or a meeting with him and you think maybe he's fallen asleep because he's sort of, like this. But what he's doing is he's absorbing everything. And then, it gets to this point where it's all a bit, everyone doesn't really know what to do. And then he'll suddenly come, sit up. Well, what we need is, and he would peak strategically.
It sounds like you had some fun managers. I mean, some managers were looking out for you. The workplace culture, it sounds like it was quite informal. Is that what was it? Can you describe what it was like, the workplace environment with your managers and your colleagues?
It was very informal, but there was sort of lots of mutual respect, and I think everybody just felt they were on the same team. It wasn't a them and us. I mean, obviously, you'd sort of have a moan sometimes because it's over something, but actually, there was a really fair, very, very respectful, and supportive. So. Yeah, and it was very much, and especially in London, there was very much a social side as well, of socialising. Not so much with, sometimes the managers would come out, but as a team and cross teams, it was just a social event. I mean, Beaujolais Nouveau was a huge day. Drinking Beaujolais Nouveau at 9 o'clock in the morning. But
was that in the office?
Not something I'd recommend doing now. Not in the office, no. But again, it was sort of recognised that okay, so you might be in at 10 o'clock, but knowing that you probably wouldn't have lunch or whatever. So there was just this give and take, and so I think it was very much. Respect that you took responsibility and accountability, and that was recognised.
That's interesting because I mean that's part of the DEC culture. I don't know if you're aware of that. This kind of taking responsibility and for your actions. Was this kind of communicated to you? This kind of like take initiative, responsibility, and if so, were you aware of it, or was it kind of actually sort of directly communicated to you? This philosophy.
No, I mean, I know now, everywhere now has their, their values and their strategies, and it gets sort of like pounded into you for any organisation that you worked for. But I don't recall, could be my memory, I don't recall any time having to sit down and, sitting to listen to a presentation about the core values of DEC, and I think you just sort of absorbed it seemed, by just, and then, obviously sort of from the top down, that there was just this, trust, respect, and accountability and responsibility. And, you were there to do a job, and it was, you do your job, but it would be, in a very sort of informal and sort of chilled environment, it just made, it didn't often seem like going to work.
Tell me a little bit about, it's an interesting discussion. It's going to a high level, this kind of concept of the management culture. You'd mentioned there the this kind of sense of values, kind of like, I suppose, trickled down from the top. We've heard often in the past that
Yeah.
DEC had a progressive workplace culture, embraced different philosophies of managing, etc., etc. Um, were you kind of aware of kind of like schools of thought or ways of manage, this kind of a sense of a management culture, whether it was kind of, would you define it in terms of being progressive or conservative in any sort of ways, or and how might you explain it?
I think it was very it felt very open and progressive in terms of, certainly as a female going through the ranks, as it were. And again, there were a lot of, when we looked at, sort of, if you're going to go down a consultancy line or the management line, there probably were, deck specific training courses, but there were also sort of industry, Sigma and various other industry type of courses that you're also encouraged to follow. So, as I say, if it may be just my memory, but I don't remember any sitting down at any time, where the values and the core values or priorities and the strategies and all of that stuff that you see, in every organisation now. I don't ever remember them being trotted out, because I think it was inherent. It was the fabric, it's the furniture, the foundation of the company, and and that was and that's very much my experience, and that was my experience sort of in London. When I did spend some time in Deck Park in Reading, which obviously a much bigger organisation and a lot more sort of teams, and I think probably as time went on, that freedom, that informality morphed a little bit more into being more formalised, more driven by performance indicators and all that good stuff.
Why is that? Because you joined in the early 80s, and by the 90s, the company was changing. Do you think that happened as a result of being
Yeah.
in Reading, or just because as the company itself went through the bigger changes?
I mean, I think I can only say it felt like it was, I think it was probably just a combination, because obviously there's a lot of organizational change going on. And I think that then, if you like, some of the foundations got a bit knocked. And so things were changing because of the, sort of structurally, due to sort of like acquisitions, and then and also being in a larger building, and that involvement in far more different teams. It just started to change as we went into the sort of late 80s.
Okay, we'll come on to that in a sec. Just going back to that, I was kind of curious. You made a comment there. You said that the culture felt open and progressive as a woman, rising up through the ranks. Just expand on that. How did it feel open and progressive? You mentioned there were other women. You worked with other women, and they were especially in your part of the company. How would you break that down? This kind of open and progressive approach, philosophy, manifestation, at least in terms of women. As you say, you're rising up through the ranks.
Well, I think, there were role models in terms of a number of women in more senior roles than I was in, and then even then more senior roles than them as well. So there was this sort of, it was just, the whole sort of pyramid thing. But there were a lot of, it wasn't as if you had, a lot of women on the front line and there were the women managers. There were women, probably, I'm going to say sort of middle management, as we went up through sort of the European management line, not so many, but certainly in terms of that first, second, third, fourth level of management. So I think it was very much, they were just role models. So you, you know, you didn't even not think about, well, that could be me, because there was a woman there. So there was, I think it was just, yes, the sort of assumption that you could do whatever you wanted, given that you had the right skills, the right support, and the competence.
Were you aware of any sort of programs to kind of, recruit or hire or elevate women through the organisation? Official programs, or was it more of an individual manager by manager perspective, do you think?
I think it was more of an individual. I mean, I can't, and again, that was where when I was in the European role, that's when I created the European Women's Management Development Network, because again, just to, it sort of there was, certainly in the UK, there was that support and development, but then and sort of upward progression, but then it would seem that you'd get so far, and then it was far more difficult to get higher. So, and again, trying to encourage other of the European countries to look at the skill space, and that given you've got as many women users as you have men users of the equipment, that actually having that the resources supporting the company that represented the demographic that we're using would be a very useful thing.
So that's just break that down. So you had a large number of women users of DEC systems. Do you want to just sort of explain that a little bit to me? Because we know, I mean, what actual end users of systems, in what kind of roles were they?
Well, again, I suppose I'm looking at it from the all-in-one element, which again, we whether we'd see it as the equivalent of Office 365 now, but that sort of thing where you've got sort of word processing. But again, if you think of some of the and the whole idea behind all-in-one was this whole sort of focus on the office and bringing teams together, and again, certainly in the finance sector, there were, I suppose, again, when you think of roles that women would have, maybe in the finance sector, in that supportive roles, the use of something like all-in-one was pretty important to them.
So so it's the use of the software, the application, all in one. A large number of women in roles in business using that, and you felt it was. In what ways would you think it benefit DEC by having a representation of women in the management or the technical side, making and selling the stuff as well?
Well, I think it's just, again, it's if you're representing the demographic that you're selling into, that, and you can actually, you've got that. It's not just all sort of male dominated. You've got a balanced view. And again, especially when you're doing, pitches and proposals into something, for a large implementation, being able to sort of think both laterally as well as logically, is really important to actually, because it's trying to actually get inside the heads of who's going to use it. And so if you know what you are, thinking about when you're using the system, that can be conveyed to understanding more about how the recipient might be thinking as well.
So go back a little bit. Tell me about the European Women's Management Development Network, which you founded. What led you to do that, and how did you go forward with that? Did you have support? Were you on your own? Because we know DEC was very receptive to letting people make initiatives and run with it. How did this come about, and how did you implement it?
Yeah. Well, I think, having had my experience sort of in London, and I was sort of I'd gone through a sort of a consultancy and then was in a management role. I could then sort of see that the role models for me looking up the tree, there weren't so many. So it was then sort of trying to then doing some research about, what the statistics, how many women at various levels and so on. And I just thought, well, we could do something about this. So I literally put a proposal together, and as I say, this was into the European management team. I had a very supportive, sort of boss and her boss. And I literally said, this is what I would like to do. We think we're missing out. There are, women who could really sort of, benefit the business if they had further training and skills development. And so it was from that basis of understanding that, there was a lot of women with lots of potential, but they weren't actually reaching that potential in the company. And I don't think it was necessarily because they were being suppressed or held down, but it was just like, well, hang on a minute, nobody's sort of thought about this, that we're missing a trick here.
So so you were supported by management. I mean, I know that DEC was always looking for, they're always trying to recruit talent, aren't they? And a big part of their plan was trying to grow it internally, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so it was just, okay, so it was about coming up with a proposal, getting some budget, and then identifying various courses that would be useful, that we felt would be useful for women who we've sort of, if you like, targeted in the European structure.
How did you find them? How would one go out about? Would you go through a sort of employee records, or people come to you? How would you go out and start, grooming the?
Well, no, it was more. Yeah, it was more about sort of trying to again, using sort of the network of management, sort of saying, which women in your organisation are have potential that maybe isn't being fulfilled. And, and then really just, it was really more of a nudge as opposed to, a sledgehammer. It was, and then it was this suggestion that actually, there are all sorts of different courses and different mechanisms, whether it be coaching, mentoring, actual training, that capability and competence could be developed.
And did you get a chance to see any results come from the network? Anything any positives come from the network?
If I'm honest, no, because I think at the same time, some of the other sort of changes that were happening, in the end, I actually left the company because I was offered redundancy, and I took that. But I do remember a number of courses that, in fact, I went on with some of my peers in Ashridge. So I know that a number of women did actually gain from it, but in terms of did that then mean that they went on to become X, Y, and Z? No, the statistics, I don't have any of that.
It sounds like, yeah. So it's kind of late in the day for the life of DEC. What was your own what was your own journey like? I was interested to go back and say your own progress. So you've gone on from, this is backstepping a little bit, you've gone on from the initial software support role, and you said you moved up into more implementation projects as well. You mentioned the work at Barker's. So tell me now how you would have supported sort of implementations, because you were actually working in server rooms and stuff. Would you have been hands-on with code? How would you have gone about supporting some of these customers like Barclays on installations?
Yeah, it was really just doing updates for them. So in the days of floppy disks or RLL2s, it was actually going and actually doing the update on the operating system in their computer rooms, for them. And then all the other stuff that's required. So that was where it started. And then within that sort of Barclays team, I then sort of worked at what became more of like an account consultant. And then again, it was going back more to the sort of that sales support role. So my job would then be to update the senior guys within Barclays as to the sort of the latest updates and what was coming and how this would help. And it involved me doing a lot of trips over to the States, with the various senior guys from Barclays, just accompanying them so they would then go and see the latest and greatest over in sort of Maynard. So that was sort of still in London then.
What did you any other kind of customers? Was Barclays a big one for you? Did you have other customers you were working with?
Barclays was my big one when I was doing that role, yes, because it was, at that time we had, so if you like, our top client, so Barclays was obviously one that would have a specific account team, and I was in the account team, the corporate account team for Barclays. Then and it was it was again just sort of indicative of how DEC was then. I mean, I think I went to see the Monet exhibition 4 times because I was accompanying, and Digital were sponsoring the Monet exhibition in, I don't know, whichever place it was in London. And then with the various, sort of director, senior managers that you would host going to the Monet exhibition was quite interesting. And in fact, especially my husband coming along, because he would end up. The automatic assumption would be that he would be the DEC employee, and I was the support act, as it were, and he had some very interesting conversations where he had to, say, "Well, hang on a minute, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm actually an air traffic controller. Nothing to do with me, mate. If you want to talk to Janet, if you need to know anything about that, because just again, I think the assumption of that it's the male who's the person to talk to rather than the female."
Was that a common kind of attitude? I mean, obviously, in the area you work in the tech company, it was very kind of male dominated. What was the kind of, how was this very kind of common sort of perception of you in your role, like woman, in terms of representing the company?
Yeah, I think it's quite, and and more so in those social events, and you sort of the wives saying, "What do you do? How many children have you got?" And it's just like, well, wait a minute, I'm not here to talk about my kids. I'm here to talk about this, that, and the other. So yes, I mean, both sort of male and female would was the assumption is you're the support act. You're the other half, as opposed to the host or what have you.
And you told me like the degree of commitment. You mentioned like in particular one support incident on All-in-One where you got called out on Christmas Day. Wasn't that correct?
Yeah. Again, it was. I think it was Christmas Day, and I was actually with friends, my digital friends, and we were all over at, I can't remember, someone's house, and in fact, it wasn't actually me that got called out. It was one of my colleagues. It was a network issue, and I think it was that one of the hardware guys. There was, and again, it was in the finance sector. So something had gone wrong. There was a hardware engineer on site. One of my colleagues got buzzed because there was, is it actually a hardware issue? Is it a network issue? And then I think they all went piling off in a taxi to, I can't remember which I think it might have been NatWest, whatever client it was, but it was, I don't know, that was just what happened. And I suppose we were being paid to be on call. So on call you were, whether it be Christmas Day or what. And sorted it out and came back and continued on partying.
What was the again when we come back to DEC's kind of corporate philosophy, we hear about this kind of idea of do the right thing. How do you think you were in a very customer-facing role? Did you have a sense of what that meant and how it was maybe implemented or transferred itself on a day-to-day basis?
Um, well, I think it just came from this fact that there was just respect, and you just did what was needed to do, but also knowing that there was the support there to do that, if that makes sense. So, and I think also the fact that there was always someone there in the background to support if you got into difficulty, whether it be technically or whatever. So that, yeah, I think that feeling that, okay, you're representing the company, but you're also the company, because knowing that the company is backing you 100%.
What about the relationship with the customers? Was there a sense of like how much it could do or was willing to do, or you as individuals were willing to do for the customer? Any ever sense of you couldn't putting deck first in a scenario rather than putting the customer first? Did that ever come to people's minds?
I think again. I think that in my experience is there was probably very good rapport with the clients, um, and I don't ever remember a situation where is it me, is it the client, or is it the company that gets put first? It was just, this is something that needs to be done, and we'll get it done.
Do you ever kind of remember any moments like that where it kind of played itself out? I mean, maybe the Christmas Day incident might be a kind of an example, but anything else you saw where the customer really was, put first?
Um, there probably are a number of them, but to be honest, I can't really recall. I think it was just in your blood that that's what you do. You didn't have to you weren't second guessing. You would just do what was needed to be done, knowing that if you'd sort of overcommitted, as it were, well, okay, you've overcommitted and it's not what we normally do, but actually, what you've done is you've made the customer happy, which is what's really important, and we'll support that overcommitment. So I think it was. Yeah, I think it was just, obviously there were times, and more so probably in the outsourcing, when I moved into outsourcing, that was far more, obviously things were far more, because you were bidding against, IBM and other organisations. You were bidding for, the contract to supply kit and software, obviously, and that had to be far more. That was more about, and there was a far more granular level of approval for that. You really had to. That had to be every sort of pound pence, and had to be accounted for. So that was a very different sort of scenario than, say, the front facing one.
Tell me about the outsourcing. I haven't really spoken to anybody about tech outsourcing before. Just give me a little flavour of what that operation was and what you did there.
Well, again, it was looking at I mean, as it had various. I'm trying to think of the names that it had, but I mean, my role was sort of in the desktop, so it was as a solutions architect. So it would be then coming up. So that we would be bidding for, and let's say it is Barclays, but they're looking for to implement PCs across their sort of UK headquarters, and they want this, that, and the other. So it's just about then how you would, and it's not only is it all the kit, it's then all the servicing as well. And then you would have to architect the whole. So let's say, for example, it might even be a call center. So architecting all the the VPNs and things like that. So so that's I was in that group again, right at the very end of my time in DEC, having sort of come out of the European role and gone back into the UK into as a solutions architect.
Okay.
And it picked up on the pre-sales role that I had previously done.
And so you mentioned some customers there. What was the European role you mentioned? Just tell me a little bit about what you did at the European level.
The European role was as a product manager in support services. So, part of the time I was sort of like the account manager for Lotus and Microsoft. So it was our third party vendor relationship, and then also the manager, the business manager for the telephone support services as well.
How did that work, being the manager for support for Lotus and Microsoft? Because they're rival products, aren't they? How would that work?
Yeah, well, it was more that we would. So again, if you think about outsourcing, so some company may well desperately, has their allegiance with Lotus or with Microsoft, and they would actually want that to be used on our kit. So it's about negotiating service contracts, product licenses, all of that sort of stuff, so that we can still service. We can still service that. It's a complete outsource, as opposed to we can only do this bit and then we have to go to somewhere else.
So Lotus obviously being Lotus Notes, which was the groupware product, and Microsoft Office or other products.
No, it was. To be honest, I can't remember the list of products there under Microsoft. But again, it was sort of in that sort of nascent age, really.
Groupware.
Early days. But yeah, Lotus Notes, definitely.
Okay, and so obviously, so you this kind of take a bit of a step back. So DEC is changing at this time. We can see the changes. You joined in the early '80s. Its high watermark was still ahead of you. I mean, it was judged the world's second largest computer company about 6 years later after you joined. But then obviously we know the history. How has it changed for you? You've obviously come a long way during this time as well. It's been a fast journey for you. What's your kind of perception of the changes taking place inside DEC? How it kind of your initial, how it was and how it's becoming towards the end?
Yeah. Well, I think it sort of went from feeling very free and open to far more constrained and challenging. And I think I can't remember. You probably know more than I do. Was the first acquisition or merger with Tandem? Was it Tandem the first one?
Compaq was the first acquisition.
Compaq. Wasn't it? Was it Compaq then Tandem?
It was Compaq then HP.
Tandem was in there. Compaq. Okay, where did Tandem came in there at one stage? There was also a
Tandem was a rival. Hang on.
I thought we went in with Tandem, and there was also a sort of because I thought it was with their dual processing power or something, or secure systems or something. I thought there was an acquisition for a reason, but maybe my
Tandem. Yeah, hang on, I'm just coming to it. So Compaq bought Tandem's I think Compaq bought some of Tandem, if not all of it.
right.
Yeah, in '97, Compaq acquired Tandem Computers, and then Compaq went on to buy DEC the following year.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was just. I think it was it all. It just did feel like the walls came tumbling down. Just in terms of a completely different feel, outlook, and then that that sort of manifests itself about everyone feeling more constrained and challenged and not so. I think the sort of that the willingness to do whatever because you didn't know whatever was now. The goalposts had changed.
Well, how do you mean?
So yeah,
How have
just
they
it
sort of
felt
changed? In what sense?
well. I think it was just with the. I suppose it was just then the imbibement of the way Compact did things, which wasn't the DEC way, and it sort of, it just felt like that freedom, that informal, that chilled, that do the right thing sort of disappeared. And it was, no, unless you have to tick the box, it has to be signed off, it has to be da 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 da. It just felt very much, there had to be far more rules. And you had to follow the rules, and if you're almost in DEC days. Yes, there were rules, but if you strayed out them, but there was a good reason for it, that was fine. But you just felt that there was this big, and this big corporation that would sort of come down on you like a ton of bricks.
So more process. Was Compaq Compaq was obviously a computer company. So you noticed the changes. How did it affect your way of working, or what your job?
Well, I think again it was where we because that was by then I was in the outsourcing team, and it was just all the process, the levels of sort of approval that you had to go through for a particular bid, were really quite. It's almost like there was no wiggle room. It had to be approved at this level, then it had to be approved at that level, and then at that level. And if the client changed the spec and you had to start again, you had to go through all these levels again. And yeah, it was, and again, because it felt far more, I think, competitive as well. I think in the sort of digital days, I think we didn't have to sort of sell ourselves very much because, if you like, the technology sold itself.
That's an interesting comment. So the technology
Whereas
sold its what to the customer? The technology sold itself.
Yeah.
How do you mean? Just explain that a little bit.
And I think, well, I think we were. I think certainly with All-in-One, it was a real sort of forefront product. And I think once people had actually understood it, I mean, I think one of the biggest downfalls for DEC was that actually we didn't do a lot of marketing. We didn't sing our own praises enough. We let the technology do the work for that. So it was almost like, it would be this sort of like slow burn as opposed to a big powerful punch. And once a client actually recognized the depth, and I think what it was that digital was actually offering, that's when it sort of sold itself. But we didn't go in all bells and whistles and we're the best thing since sliced bread. It was very much this sort of, we can do that for you, as opposed to the big brash marketing approach and I think that's where it felt very different with Compact, because it was all about, right, you've got to, very much around the brand. It's got to be this, it's got to be this size, it's got to be that. Very specific, it felt. Very constrained.
Did you find I hear the DEC was very much selling to other engineers, whereas other technical companies were targeting the management. Did you find that was kind of a accurate summary?
Yeah. Yeah, very much, very much. And I think, and and because they were, the techs, they loved it. They loved the technology, and but yeah, we sort of we weren't all out selling, you know. Um, it was sort of letting the tech sell itself.
What so Dex sort of coming to an end, and where were you? So you took redundancy. Was that before the HPE deal or after?
It was in 2000, I think. Was it 2000? I think it was just the HP deal was on. It was either on the horizon coming or just, I can't. Yeah, I think it was.
It,
I
it was
really,
'02.
to be
The
honest, I
deal
can't.
was '02. So
I
yeah,
can't.
it was kind of in the future, but it was coming.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
made you take
yeah.
redundancy, and what were the
Yeah.
circumstances?
Well, I think it was. I was in the outsourcing uh, unit, and it was again. When we worked on bids, we were working. I mean, I can remember I was actually pregnant, and working through till 4 in the morning to actually get a bid out. Um, and I think it was just, hang on a minute, that was expected as opposed to me wanting to do that, which I'd have done in the old days. So I think the circumstances I then, I just felt it was far too, yeah, the culture just, it had changed so much. I just didn't feel very comfortable in the new culture. And the fact that actually I was offered redundancy, I just thought, well, to be honest, I didn't start off as wanting to work for a tech company in the first place. So this was my opportunity to then go and do something different. So I just, it was just one of those things. Well, you know, let's see what else is out there.
And then the acquisition happened. Where were you when you heard about the HPE deal? What did you think?
Well, I mean, to me, it was just another brick in the wall in terms of the demise of DEC.
How did that make you feel? You saw it happen. How any kind of feelings about the deal? Some people have told me how it affected
Well,
them, but I'm curious about what your
yeah,
thoughts.
I mean, I think I suppose my reflection was that I think I was just so lucky to have been employed in the heydays, as it were, and to have so enjoyed and have gained so much out of that time with DEC, whether it be, the skills, but also the friends and I think just the values and what working for a large corporation can be like. And so the fact that, and I've worked with other organizations since then, nothing's ever come quite near it. So I feel it was like a privilege to have worked with DEC in those days. And I suppose in ways maybe sort of the writing was on the wall with in terms of, because it's almost like because of the kind of company DEC was, it was almost victim of its own success from an internal point of view,
And did
if you know what I mean. So it was.
no, I was going to ask you, did you obviously it's interesting to hear people's reflections on the downfall. Do you have any? Where did you go to after that? Did you stay in the tech sector, or did you go to other tech companies?
Yeah, I had a bit of time off because I had my first child, and then I actually joined. It was an offshoot of the digital education side, so Global Knowledge, and I became a product manager there, business manager, because they had again in the software side. I came and managed a couple of their business lines there for them. And then I went on to work for a company in London that was creating apprenticeships, so tech apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. So that was then, and now I work for the NHS.
And
So quite a career change about 8 years ago.
what do you think? Any sort of abiding memories of Deck during that time? I mean, it sounds like you travelled quite a lot. You got to see France and the US. Any kind of abiding memories from work or activities you did that still stick with you to this day?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I had some. I mean, I remember actually one. I went for a job interview in Valbonne and the friends that in fact I still see today, and in fact that were with us, on that Christmas day. I think two of the guys there were down on a network course, and I was having an interview to actually potentially join the European customer support group in Valbonne. And we hired a villa in in Valbonne for a week. Drove down there. The guys went off on their course. I had my series of interviews, but other halves were there as well. So I remember that very fondly. I remember the time going down to Cannes, to Nice, to the where we had the Decville, so the European sort of exhibitions, and again being put up in the Great Albion, and again this was all in the earlier days, setting up all the equipment, installing stuff, and then being there to provide support as the exhibition went through. Yeah, and I think really it's the legacy of the friendships that I made that are still there, today, as well as I think the opportunities that were offered to me and that I took. And I probably don't recognize or realize how lucky, or how fortunate that I was there at that particular time.
I was going to ask you actually, any particular skills, or how do you think your time at Deck shaped you? Anything either picked up organically, or skills you developed there or personality that you kind of acquire that you've taken that elsewhere in the world that you can definitely put a label and say yes because of Deck this?
I think probably the ability. I think confidence is a huge one. In that it did developing me and helping develop my confidence in all sorts of different scenarios. Public speaking, presenting, workshop facilitation, all of that sort of stuff, and as well as being able to, if you like, see, big picture thinking as well, and. I'd seem very good at give me a blank sheet of paper and I can actually come up with a proposal or a construct quite easily, because that was something, I don't know, very much that, you were encouraged to do. There's an issue, right? Just think outside the box. I suppose, what we'd call blue sky thinking and all of that stuff.
And interesting to hear also your reflections, bearing in mind your circumstances in which you joined Deck. It's pretty much, it was a job to come back to after traveling. Who
Yeah.
knows? I can't imagine you had any sense you were going to stay there for terribly long. What's the
No.
you had no idea what was in store for you. What's your kind of, what, I don't know,
Yeah.
how do I put this? What's a reflection on Deck, looking at back? Are you, I suppose, what's your impression on where you are, how long you stayed, the impression it shaped you, considering the circumstances in which you joined, which was, very much, shall we say, opportunistic slightly?
Yeah, well, I feel very fortunate that obviously something in the universe was guiding me. I don't know, the fact that I think it was just a lot of sort of circumstances, a lot of things just coming together. The fact that I was offered the job while I was still traveling, and I could, have the interview in Auckland and then start in London. I don't know, it just felt right. I didn't really think about it too deeply, really. I needed a job. This was a job. I never envisaged, that what I would have got out of it in any way, shape, or form. Because, as I say, to me it was a job, but actually, it was more than a job. It was I think, it's that. It was such an amazing foundation of skills development and support and friendship that yeah, I doubt that I'd have ever, you know, gained from working anywhere else. So for me, it's a huge, a huge, very wonderful part of my career.
And I guess I just reflect going right back a little bit. Did you? And what was Deck Park like? You didn't get to spend. Interest. A lot of people spent their a large part of their working lives there. What did you? You visited him frequently. What was your memories or take on Deck Park? Because they obviously built the huge facility, quite new by the time you joined.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it felt a bit unfriendly. It was a bit big. I also worked in Acre Road and various other sort of offshoots there. And I suppose nothing really compared to being in London. And that wasn't just, and I suppose also, by that time I'd had, a child, so your whole social thing, social life changes. But it was a very big, a bit impersonal for me, compared to what I was used to sort of in London, even in Holborn, where we moved to after Oxford Street. It just, yeah. I mean, I've also worked in Old Basing and a number of the Basingstoke offices as well. But I think it was the heydays of London, were just are so memorable and just give me that sort of warm fuzzy feeling, and sort of things weren't quite so wonderful, after that.
And I suppose just going back as well, you just made me think. You joined the graduate trainee program. What did you? How did
Yeah.
your peers do at university? Did you see them going to other jobs? Were you doing? Because I've heard people who joined Debt got incredible pay rises, for example, um, and great salaries compared to they moved jobs. They've got amazing salary bumps. Did you get any sense of how you were performing compared to people who graduated at the same time as you?
Well, yeah, because I think, funnily enough, a lot of my friends went into sort of the health service. So a couple of them, went into the NHS. So obviously their salaries were completely on a different scale to mine. Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, I probably, if I think about my peers, I was probably in the, one of the top earners, if you were,
Did you
just because
notice
of working
a
where I
decent
was.
salary and a lifestyle coming from that from Debt?
Well, yeah, because I managed to, I bought a flat in Pinner in I can't remember, 84. So again, I think all of those things, it just didn't, just enabled. But again, I don't think I probably appreciated how fortunate I was at that particular time.
What? So just wrapping up there, Johnny. Just tell me. So, what do you think is Deck's sort of legacy, if anything, on the world? We talked about it. It's what it left for you. What's your kind of views on its legacy as a company, either in the UK or on a global sense, or even a technology sense, if any at all?
Well, I think it was a real uh, forerunner from a technology point of view. But and its downfall was the fact that it didn't market itself. So, but putting that aside, I think, for me, the impact that it had on so many people, the employees' lives, was just so positive. So, you know, on the outside, it didn't do a great job promoting itself. On the inside, it almost, because it didn't promote itself outside, inside, it just seemed to sort of, we just absorbed the whole culture, and the culture was just such a great, just made it such a great place to live, to work in.
And I suppose all those relationships were formed as a result. It's the human legacy, I suppose we might say.
Yeah. Yeah, human legacy, absolutely. Yeah, and there's still loads of. I still have loads of bits and. I have so many bits and bits. I just looked at that, just uh, Yes, when I look, I've got I went on a we had these what were they called? These sort of awards, and I won a trip to Hawaii. And then when you have a bag, a towel, everything is they flew, was it the Gladys Knight and the Two Pips out in Concord. Ken Olsen was there, and the final night, no alcohol until he went. There's just amazing things like that. So there's also that legacy in terms of the whole sort of award system was quite well, it's out of this world, really. Not something you get now.
This sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Any kind of final thoughts? Anything you think we haven't covered? Do you think maybe should be said about DEC?
No, I think it's just as I think probably when you're saying the legacy is the human legacy, the is all those there are people that I'm still in contact with. I've got friends, but there's also people who are still in my I might not see them, but I still they when I think about them and the circumstances, they still bring a warm, nice feeling inside because of them as individuals, but in terms of the context in which I met them.